And what I'm going to do today is good afternoon. What I'm going to do today is I am going to do a lesson on different types of government. A lot of people get mixed up on autocratic, totalitarian, fascism, dictatorships. Where do those all fit in? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to break everything down for you so that you can see that there's some overlapping in some cases, and I want you to understand it. So I'm actually going to start with probably the easiest one to relate with, and that's democracy. Okay, we all know about democracy. We have an understanding of what it is. And there's basically two types of government. There's democratic systems, and then there's autocratic systems. Okay, so you have democracy and you have autocratic, or sometimes they're referred to as authoritarian. And you should be able to see this on here. If not, I guess listen very carefully. It's coming up clearly on my screen. Okay, under democracy, you have two general types. One is direct democracy, and I noticed a number of you talked about that in some of the writings you've done. Direct democracy, and I threw an E in there earlier. Okay, and then over here we have representative democracy. This is the one we are most familiar with. This, of course, is what we live in. So I'll go over them. A direct democracy. Oh, I should step back first. Democracy equals people rule or rule by the people. Autocratic rule equals absolute rule. So it means that you have someone, sometimes a small body or a group, that has absolute rule, whereas here, the people rule. So these are the two different types. So back to this, direct democracy is every person votes on every issue. This was a democracy that was done when they started talking about democracy thousands of years ago. It's sometimes used in small scale, like you could potentially have one in a school or something like that with your student council. However, our societies have become too large. We cannot have every person vote on every issue. As it is right now, if you look at voter turnout rates with regards to the United States in particular, they usually run in the 60-odd percentile of eligible voters even show up once every 4 years to vote. Can you imagine if you were to come and vote on every single issue? The other thing is when you look at the expertise and you look at the time it takes and the expense. So if every time, what do governments do? They pass laws. And so they debate things and then eventually they go to a vote. And as they're debating things and they're starting to pass laws, we'll see this, we get informed with this through the media and so on, through press releases, through the government themselves going on, telling us about it, so on and so forth. And then we elect our people to represent us versus voting on every issue. It's just not practical. Most people would be disengaged. They don't have the time because that's what politicians, that's their full-time job. I don't have time, even as a social studies teacher, to follow in detail every single issue that's going on all the time. You guys certainly wouldn't want to, and some of you are 18 or you're going to be soon, you're going off to university, you're working, whatever. Are you going to sit and follow every single issue? So to vote, you'd be voting in ignorance in many cases because you wouldn't have the time to follow it. And would you even bother to jump in your vehicle, go to a voting poll, and then vote? So direct democracy doesn't really exist today when we're talking about countries. You can in small organizations. Okay, let's have a show of hands. How do we as an organization want to go forward? But this is basically it. That brings us to representative democracy. So that means we elect people or representatives to represent us. It's in the name itself. Now, within representative democracy, there's all kinds of different types, and you can look this up later, but I want you to see kind of the big picture. So we have government, and then there's government, and then there's democracy and autocratic, and I just kind of want to give you visual. I'm not going to cover every single type of government out there. There's so many different versions. But very simply, if we look at, we know that the United States is a representative democracy. I'm thinking you know that. We, of course, know that Canada is a representative democracy. We also know that Canada and the United States, even though they're both democracies and they're both representative democracies, you probably know that they're not the same. They have a president, we have a prime minister. Their Senate is elected, ours is appointed. And so there's some differences within the system that we'll have a little bit of a chance to look at down the road. So within these different types of democracies, you will have different versions as well. So you'll have Canada, you'll have the US, Sweden's another one that has what's called proportional representation, so it has a different system. So in Canada, we are often referred to as a constitutional monarchy. I'm going to run out of room here. In the United States, it's often referred to, hopefully you can read my chicken scratch. If not, you can play this back and listen over and over. In the United States, it's often referred to as a Republican democracy. Now, constitutional monarchy in Canada, because we know that our actual head of state theoretically is the Queen of England, represented by the Governor General. 75% of Canadians get that question wrong, by the way, when asked who the head of state is. Okay, it actually is the Governor General or the Queen of England. Okay, not the Prime Minister. So our system is very different. In the US, very quickly, they have a president that actually has veto power. So their Senate, their House of Representatives, which is basically their House of Commons, can vote on things. If it goes to the president, and so far it's always been he, if he doesn't like it, he can veto it and stop it, then kicks it back down to the House of Representatives. They have to then pass it by a 2/3 majority. Our prime minister, for example, that's another term actually, constitutional monarchy, sometimes we're referred to as a parliamentary democracy as well. In our system, our prime minister has no extra powers. Our prime minister is one of 338 MPs that when it comes time to vote, he gets to vote once, just like everyone else. Now, he can go around and push and bully, if you will, and convince his people and say, you better vote this way and support us if you want to stay in the party. However, at the end of the day, he gets one vote out of over 300 votes if things pass, no veto power. So you know that the US system and the Canada system is different. They both are represented democracies, and of course they fall under democracy that ultimately the people do rule, and it comes back to power of the people. Okay, so that's this system. We're going to draw a big line down here. So when you're hearing all these different terms, and some of them you will see different terms. So for example, Canada might be referred to as a parliamentary democracy, a constitutional monarchy, and so on and so forth. So just start getting familiar with that. Now I want to talk about authoritarian or absolute rule. It's the same idea. There's different branches, then there's subsets and examples of each. And that's where we're getting into now, because democracy, of course, and this whole course is about ideologies, and we've been focusing on liberalism. And again, forget about Justin Trudeau, the idea of anything right of the spectrum about promoting freedom and giving power to the people ruling. Okay? What we're seeing immediately as we get into this unit, and we started to see in the last one, the Industrial Revolution, is rejection of liberal ideas, the liberal ideology of, oh, let's just have freedom. Then we see some restrictions, and now we're going to see an outright rejection of all of it. Forget about the people, screw that. We need an absolute ruler to come in and take power. So there are essentially two different types. The first one is a big word. It's totalitarian rule. Okay. Now, when you get a big word like this, it doesn't always work, but it often can. If you look closely, the base of the word is total. And so that's where you have totalitarian equals total control. Depending how your teacher set up your grade 11 course last year, you might have been introduced with this under Stalin and Hitler and so on and so forth. okay, as with autocratic. It depends, again, teacher. You should have probably looked at it a little bit in grade 9, but that was a while ago. Okay, we have totalitarian regimes. Over here, what I tend to do is put dictatorships. Now, dictatorships, here's where the complexity comes in. You're going to see mixed messages on some of these. I'm going to put it a certain way where you'll usually see it, and social studies geeks like myself can get together and argue about it and stuff like that. There are different types, and you'll see how this works in a minute. There are different types of dictatorships. Okay, one of the more common ones is a military. Okay, a military dictatorship. So usually that's when you get someone that obviously is in the military, a general that rises up through the power, and then they do what's called a coup d'etat, a military overthrow of government, and essentially that military leader will take control of the government and dictate and take control of the country. That's one type. Another example of a dictatorship would be an absolute monarchy. So you can have a king or a queen type system. This would be your czars as well in Russia in the past. So that would be seen often as a dictatorship. So they're in control, but they have people underneath them. So if you look at, if you remember the French Revolution from grade 11, you had a king or queen dictatorship, but they also had, they weren't in total control. They were, but they weren't, in that they had a government that sometimes they worked with, particularly in England, where they have it's not a dictatorship because they moved to parliament. The other one, and there are more dictatorships, again, these are some of the basics just so you get to understand it, is fascism, which you're going to look at. You may have looked at this, probably became familiar with this term last year in grade 11. Ideally, in grade 11, you study the history of Adolf Hitler and kind of his rise to power and what was going on there. Now we look at the actual ideology and what does it really mean to be a fascist. Okay, under fascism, this term gets thrown around. There's really only been a handful of fascist dictatorships ever. So if you go, wait a minute, Hitler's an autocratic ruler, he's a dictator, he's a fascist, what the heck is going on? Now start to notice the flow. Autocratic is on, and again, this isn't about right wing or left wing. This is about types of government, okay? So don't think I'm going right wing, left wing here, I'm not. It's just broken up. So you think, okay, well, autocratic government, dictatorships or totalitarian, and then boom, fascism. So you can notice how the terms are kind of blending together, and that's where the confusion comes up, and that's why I'm drawing it out for you. Okay, so under fascism, okay, and hopefully there's not too much of a reflection here. Either way, just listen carefully. This is where you have Hitler, who we're all familiar with. We have Mussolini, crazy school teacher. Gotta watch the school teachers. And I may have spelled that wrong, but Benito Mussolini. And then another one, there was a guy named Tito in Yugoslavia. Those are basically the three fascist dictatorships in history. Mussolini, father of fascism, 1922, Italy takes over. Hitler learns from him. Actually, they become brothers from another mother. And one had the brown shirts, one had the black shirts, and they would go out and beat up union workers and strikers because unions they seen as very socialist, and they cater to the wealthy, the fascists. That's where they actually get their power base. And if you know from the history, depending how much detail you went into, or your teacher went into last year in grade 11, the Great Plague from the East was the communists in the Soviet Union after World War I. And so if you're a rich person, you definitely don't want communism because it's about making everything equal. If you're poor, communism sounds kind of appealing because you get a little bit more of the piece of the pie versus no pie. And so they refer to it as a great plague from the East that was coming in, creeping in. And so a strong stand towards communism was fascism because Hitler and Mussolini literally had thugs, and I get them mixed up. One had the brown shirts, one had the black shirts. They grabbed pieces of 2x4 and they would run out and they'd see striking workers and start beating them up. And the rich people are like, I like you, that's good, because we want a disciplined workforce. And so it's very different though than communism, which we'll get to in a moment. Okay, so those are those, you have those two. Tito Bronze, basically all you need to know about him, Yugoslavia, 1945 to 80, he set up a fascist regime. We'll get into the actual characteristics of fascism as we go on. The important thing today is understand fascism, dictatorship, autocratic rule. Okay, now I'm going to go to totalitarianism now. And where I think the best example of that is Stalin and, of course, the USSR. Now, I want to make this very clear. You may do some readings, you may get some resources and go on, and people will say, oh, Hitler's a totalitarian ruler. Okay, it doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong. However, we know for a fact he's fascist because fascism is a very distinctive form, and we know for a fact we could fall under dictatorship and autocratic rule. Sometimes they say Hitler was a totalitarian ruler because he was the man, he was in control. I have a problem with that, and you will see it the way I do it as well. It's not just Freer's ideas, so others, and that's why I said sometimes they'll have Hitler under here. Here's the thing. Hitler, he was the man, he was in control. However, he gets his power base from the capitalists, the wealthy. Because again, what I was talking about a moment ago is that the wealthy didn't want communism. Democracy is a weak stand towards communism because democracy allows fascist dictatorships, communist parties, and everything to exist. Fascists, they just beat them up, kill them, shoot them, whatever. And so the wealthy capitalist liked Hitler because he was so extreme. And I'll jump down for a moment. If you think about your political spectrum that goes like this, your capitalists are over here and your fascists are far right. Okay? He catered to the wealthy. Now, I'm not saying capitalists and business people are fascists. Don't put words in my mouth. However, you can see the bit of a connection there. Okay, why some would certainly support fascism, and you probably get the idea why most would certainly not want communism. Okay, so the thing with Stalin is why I consider him a totalitarian ruler and Hitler not, is because under Stalin and totalitarianism, you had the USSR, and the USSR absolutely had total control over everything because there were no capitalists like Hitler had to deal with because the government owned everything. And so the best, I believe, if Stalin, without a doubt, we know he's under totalitarianism. Hitler, he was a dictator. Make no mistake about it, he was in control. However, he could be in total control. However, the private businesses did exist in his Germany, as it did under Mussolini. And so that's why I don't think it's 100% accurate to call him a totalitarian ruler. He could take charge of those businesses because he did allow that private enterprise to exist. We're under Stalin, total control. Okay, I think that's it. There are certainly more types of dictatorships. There's lots of examples. Pinochet out of Chile would be a good military one. You have different Middle Eastern countries that have princes and sultans and so on that are in power that fall under dictatorships. Totalitarianism, Stalin is probably, well, he's the best example that I can certainly think of. And then they all fall under autocratic rule. So the purpose of today's lesson was to understand, and I'll move this a little bit closer, was hopefully that you get a basic understanding of, and I'm just going off to the side to try to kill the lights a little bit, and I'll just review a little bit more again here. Oh, maybe that's better. So you have government, you have democracy on one side, autocratic on the other. Right, left, it's not about that. Because under autocratic rule, fascism is the far right on the spectrum, communism is the far left. And people tend to get them mixed up all the time. This is what they do have in common. Communism, of course, is over here. Fascism is over here. So yes, they are both autocratic systems, but they have very different values. And that's why we started this course with values and beliefs and work into the ideologies. Now you understand the different types of government. Democracy and lots of different types, autocratic and lots of different types. So That's it for now. I'm going to stop recording in a moment. We're going to do a tutorial tonight where you can certainly ask questions on this from 5 to 7 if you're available. And I'm going to talk about some test wiseness at the tutorial tonight if you want to join us, where we'll just talk about taking multiple choice tests, and we'll go over a couple questions from the quiz that you already have. Okay, I'm signing out for now. Hopefully you can screenshot that and that makes sense. We've got there. Actually, I'll move it back a little bit again. But if you're listening carefully, you could have heard everything, but you can certainly ask questions anytime. And I mean, you don't have to wait till tonight to ask questions. It's been a pretty busy day, but you can always email me and I can get back to you. I have everything marked thus far, just about everything. Some people with a couple of late things will get in later, and I'll be putting things in Power School in the next day or two. I've just asked that your Power School be opened up so that you can go in and look at your grades on there. Don't go get too excited yet. I will let you know when they're in Power School. Okay, over and out.